Hello and welcome back to Rage Gaming and more Nightreign Deep of Night talk. Today we're getting into the new weapons, the stacking positives, the new negatives, what to avoid and what actually makes for an incredible weapon. To answer this, we gotta ask, what is a deep weapon, a red weapon? Well, a red weapon specifically is just a purple, but one you found in the Deep of Night mode. That's basically it. So if you were to find a normal blue in Deep of Night, it's still going to have two positives and a negative like a red would. But a red generally has a better base for the potential of Ash of War and what the weapon actually will be. But what is the actual potential? We're able to take a look at all the new stuff thanks to some Datamined info, compiled into an incredible spreadsheet. This was made by Slay with help from Online Betters and Emerald Wolf. I'll be asking Josh to link it in the description so you can have a look yourself. But within this spreadsheet, we have a tab dedicated to just the new deep weapons, as we'll call them, since some are red, some aren't. But what is possible to be found on these new weapons. Now, before we look at the spreadsheet stuff, where can you find red weapons specifically? Well, you get them from a few sources, like basic mutant enemies. Even if it's a normal guy and they happen to be a mutant, there's a chance that they're going to drop a red weapon. They'll always drop at least a weapon, and of course it could roll into a red one, so it always makes it worth killing them. Obviously after that, you have the mutant bosses from the open world, where you're likely to get a dormant power offering that has a red weapon. But obviously it has to actually offer a red weapon. Important to be aware of because, we're farming jails still for the stacking attack power buff, and jails don't offer weapon rewards. Other sources of red weapons exist though. You're going to find a really reliable source in the Night Invaders. These are found at the Storm Cataclysm events, which in the Deep of Night mode are a lot more common. I'm seeing one almost every run, and sometimes multiple. And then when you go to them, there might be multiple invaders there. Each one of them always drops their loot, which will be two options, one of which is tied to the Nightfarer it was. And before that would have been a +2 purple, now in the depths, that means it's going to be a red drop. So it's actually a top tier source of that. Not to mention the meta of the 7% attack power boost from defeating Night Invaders if you have that relic line. And so going after these invaders for their red drops too, and that stacking power, super good. Lastly, other than the obvious potential of looting a body or opening a chest and maybe a red happens, there's also merchants. They're sometimes offering a red weapon if you're lucky, which will cost you 50,000 runes. I've seen this at the merchant village specifically, but maybe it's possible on a normal merchant, I just haven't seen that. But either way, merchant stock's always worth looking at, and even more so in this mode. Let's now look at some incredible examples we've seen on Reddit for what's actually possible. Starting with this one, all to do with resistances and sleep. So you can see from this weapon here, we have a Great Claw that comes with all resistances up at 65 and then improves sleep resistance 112. And apparently the boss for this run was Augur, so you couldn't ask for better than that. Imagine the same thing for Madness resistance for Libra. Ultra resistance will make you basically ignore boss mechanics. So something like this would be incredible. On the other hand, you have boss weaknesses, familiar concepts like Gladius being weak to Holy. If you were to find a weapon like this halberd, well then you'd be pretty happy. It has Sacred Blade on it, which is going to be a ranged holy attack and buffs the weapon. It has Holy Shockwave upon charge attacks, where you hold a charge attack, full heavy attack, and it does this explosion of some kind of effect. There's a bunch of different ones we're going to look at, like the Black Flame % damage over time one. So obviously this was phenomenal for the weakness of the boss. Here's an example of one that I can show you. We have Blade of Coaling here, which is nice, comes with Blade of Gold, sure. And their roll on this is very good too. Black Flames upon charge attacks, FP Restoration on landing attacks, that's a familiar one. Reduced maximum health as the negative 6% less, I think is stomachable. So this is another one upon charge attacks we look at. But this is one I can show you where I had the Godslayer weapon. As you can see, I'm holding a heavy attack and slamming it, and it's causing this burst of Black Flames. Black Flames does damage over time and % health based on the health that you're dealing with. So against bosses, it's very potent. What's interesting about this effect though, is it seems to have more stagger potential than normal. So as you're hitting with a charge heavy, that's pretty good stagger buildup, right? But then the explosion upon charge attacks, that effect that exists in this mode, seems to also build into the stagger. So people are finding that staggering with charge attacks with these setups is super good. Therefore, if you find upon charge attacks, if anyone's in your team that can lean into it and make a build around it quickly, it would be very strong. Lastly, I also want to mention ranged examples like this pulley bow. One that's not that exciting because its Ash of War is not very good, but as you can see, it has blood flies upon precision aiming. This means when you're two-handing the weapon and aiming in, every single attack will send out blood flies, which is normally a slow-moving incantation that deals damage and great bleed build-up when it connects. Since it costs no FP to just fire attacks while aiming, this will be an unbelievable source of bleed. Another example of that would be the lightning strike. Every single attack is a lightning burst of damage on the target as you're aiming in. Now you combine this concept with slow walking passives, dormant powers that were familiar from the normal game, because they trigger when you're precision aiming because you're walking slowly when precision aiming. A concept like that would be unbelievably potent. So there's just some visual examples and ideas for that. Let's now take a look at the sheet info and discuss what's really possible, what's good, the curses you can handle, what you can avoid, and all the new stuff. Keep in mind what we're about to look at though is just the new boons and curses. So old familiar boons like FP restoration when you land attacks, they're not going to be here. Just the new stuff. Alright, first up we have the 3 stat changes. You have increased maximum health, FP, and stamina. This is stackable, so it leans into any other increases of this kind, and if you find multiple of these on weapons, it will stack. Next we have more runes from defeated enemies. This is a 6% and 9% increase, and it does stack, and the sooner you get this in a run, obviously the better. We have physical attack up, which is a 5.5% physical damage increase, or a 8% damage increase. It is stackable, and is an obvious choice. Next, we have more specific stuff like improved affinity attack power, improved thrusting counterattack. The affinity attack power is going to increase the magic, fire, lightning, and holy damage found on a weapon by 5.5 or 1.8, just like physical damage. Meanwhile, the improved thrusting counterattack is about counter hit damage. As you land a blow and trade with an enemy, it's going to enhance that, but it has to be thrusting focused. This is more potent because it's more limited. A 10% damage increase or a 15% damage increase, and again, this is stackable. An important one that you can find is improved stance breaking. Of course, that's going to be great with any jump attack or charge heavy build. There's 2 in regards to sorcery and incantations. There's straight up improved versions of that, and then increased duration of those. For the damage, you're increasing the damage by 5.5% or 8%, and it's also another one you can stack up. But then we have the duration increase, so that's a 45 or 60% increase of duration. This is a bit awkward because some spells, you know, they have duration, but a lot of them don't have a duration effect. So in the rare scenario where you can find that, this could really increase how long they last. And it is stackable. Next, we have the pile of upon charge attacks. So you've got Ice Storm, Black Flames like we looked at, Phantom Attack, Holy Shockwaves, Luring Enemies is an interesting one, Magma, Lightning, and Sleep Mist. So you'll see that each one has its own unique effect, whether that's like a Black Flame occurrence or Frost or Lightning, and then you get a weapon buff for about 20 seconds with most of them. So every one of these I feel is incredibly potent, especially if you have any other way to enhance charge attacks and leaning into this concept. Next, we have the range stuff. So, projectiles launch upon charge attacks. It fires 3 magic projectiles after landing a charged heavy bow shot. And then you've got the upon precision aiming. There is lightning, poison mist, rot mist, and blood flies, all in that category of aiming in. You must manually aim these and land the attack, but obviously the potential is really high. Combine that with any slow walking dormant power trigger, it's gonna be nuts. So definitely look for that. Another new one that's interesting is a guarding will kind of give you a little buff to sorcery and incantations. So after blocking for 2 seconds, it increases your spell damage by 10%, stacking into itself up to 3 times, so 30%, lasting 25 seconds. This is actually really potent and well worth engaging with if you find it. Next, we have the new defensive options. Improved poise, all resistance is up, shielding creates holy ground, and broken stance activates endure. So you just reduce the poise damage coming your way with improved poise. All resistance is up, gives you that resistance of 52 or 65, and don't forget, this is stackable. So if you find multiple all resistances on your weapons, that could be insane. For shielding creates holy ground, it's just the holy ground effect, but you need to block for 3 seconds straight. Whereas broken stance activates endure, just gives you the endure ash of war. The moment you're blocking and your guard breaks, you suddenly have this really insane poise to trade with. Lastly, for positive boons, we have the regen ones. The new ones here are improved stamina recovery, flask health restoration, flask healing also restores FP, and failing to cast spell restores FP. Improved stamina recovery, stacks, and will increase it by 3 or 5 per. Improved flask health restoration, also stacks, so you can get a bunch of these across your weapons. Each one will be a 13 or 18% increase to the health you get from flasks. So just a few of those could mean one flask heals an unbelievable amount. Otherwise, getting some FP when you heal with a flask is pretty cool. Failing to cast a spell restores FP, which basically means, you know, when you try to cast a spell and you don't have enough FP and then they do that silly animation where they're looking at the staff or whatever, this gives you 13% max FP back when you do it, which is pretty cool. Sadly, it isn't stackable, so you can't get crazy returns. But now let's talk about the curses that exist and what maybe you can tank or you might want to avoid. Starting with reduced max health, FP, and stamina. These are stackable, so taking one is not that bad, but taking multiple gets pretty bad. I think reduced FP is going to be the most tankable one there, but because it stacks, you don't want to go on multiple of those. Near death reduces max HP. This decreases your max health by 0.85 times for 30 seconds after being downed. So if you go downed, you get back up with reduced health for the next half minute. But then it comes back. This doesn't matter at all in my opinion, certainly not in solo mode. For half a minute too, is very manageable. Attacks impaired on occasion. Each attack has a 3 or 5% chance to deal 0 damage. I think this is really bad, and it can trigger whether you're doing a load of attacks and then you just miss a few here or there, or you're doing some slow big attacks and then it just does nothing. I think this has a nasty chance of backfiring at the wrong time. Lower attack when below max HP. This is specifically triggering when your health is below 85%. So if you're at 95%, 90%, you're okay. I do think it's certainly something to avoid, but if you have a lot of regen in the team and you're staying healthy all the time, then maybe, but I do think it's a bad one. Slower art gauge when below max health. So you gain less ultimate gauge by 10 or 15% times when your health is below 85%. Another one that is tankable but not ideal. Near death reduces art gauge. This decreases ultimate gauge by 25 or 33 when the wearer is down. So you're just going to lose like a quarter of your currently filled art gauge the moment you go down. I also think that's pretty tankable. Impaired physical damage negation and impaired affinity damage negation increases the damage you're going to take by these types. So the physical damage is going to increase by 5.5 or 8% depending on the roll. And then the affinity means you're going to take increased magic, fire, lightning, and holy damage by 5.5 or 8%. And these are stackable, guys. So you might be able to get away with one, but stacking those up is a very bad idea. More damage taken after evasion, though, is nasty. Increases damage taken by 15 or 20% right after rolling, and it stacks. So a bunch of these will be nightmarish. Another one that's similar is repeated evasions lower damage negation. So this is more about repeat rolls rather than every roll that you do. So you roll like 3 times, and then you get a 15-second debuff of 23 or 30% increased damage taken. Even worse than the last one. And this also stacks. Probably avoid it unless you're never evading. Reduced damage negation for flask uses is unbelievably bad. The moment you use a flask, you're taking 33 or 46% increased damage, and this also stacks. I had this run where I was against Libra, and I had this debuff. I healed, and then he put a seal right below me, and it just straight took me out. So probably avoid that one. Lower stamina impairs damage negation, means you take increased damage by 10 or 15% when your stamina is at or below 50%. Also this stacks, so it can be scary. Knight's Tide damage increases the damage you take from the blue by 2 or 2.5 times. So you're taking double or even more from the blue, equating to pretty much death in most cases. I think this is fantastic to take, but you must respect the blue a lot more while you've got it. Not to be confused with damage increased by Knight's Encroachment though. This increases damage taken by 1 or 2.5% throughout each day 4 times. So this means that as the circle shows you where it's closing, begins to close, finishes closing, and then, shrinks, you're getting this stacking debuff 4 times throughout a day. So this could be up to 10% more damage taken. Resetting after the day ends, you defeat the night boss and you begin again, making the day harder and harder as you go. It also stacks, by the way, so having multiple of these would be pretty heinous. Then you've got all resistances down, reducing your status resist by 30 or 45, and it does stack. Ailments cause increased damage, just meaning status damage received is up by 30 or 45%. That stacks. Reduce flask health restoration, reduces the health you get from a flask by 0.94 times or 0.91 times. So basically 6% less healing, or 9% less, and it does stack, by the way. I actually think this is fine to take because slightly less healing on your flask is okay. You might find increased flask stuff throughout a run or from your relics, and there does come a point when you buffed up your flask to overheal a lot, so it's wasted anyway. One that I don't like at all is continuous health loss, taking 1 health per second or even faster, and that stacks, especially when you have any curse that's going to trigger when you're below 85% health, like poison buildup when below max health, or rot buildup, building poison and rot very quickly when the health is below 85%, and those stack too. But yeah, there you have it. Overall, you can see there's a ton of potential with deep weapons and red weapons, especially a strong base with potentially a great Ash of War. In many cases, with the charge attack bonuses, it's like having a legendary passive without the legendary. But do these beat out legendaries conceptually? Well, not exactly. Plenty of legendaries still have insane Ashes of War, or potent passives, like the familiar power stacking after a kill with Mariah's Executioner Sword or Grafted Blade. And yeah, those were nerfed to no longer infinitely stack, but it still stacks up to 100 kills before it reaches a cap, providing a huge damage increase on other bonuses in Grafted's case. Other examples like the gold Ash of War, like Wave, or Mogwin's Bloodboon Ritual for insane AoE purposes, they still have high value. So it's just not as cut and dry as it used to be with various legendaries, but legendaries are still going to be very good, obviously. I hope this overview of what's possible gives you an idea of maybe what you should take or what you should avoid. Now we know more specific stats and numbers. And obviously that all combines on top of normal passives you might find from normal gameplay. So big thank you again to the data miners like Slay who give us this information to even consider. But if you guys have any extra information or just advice, let us know in the comments. Until next time, I've been Hollow, you've been you, thanks for watching.
Josh, Cotton, and Hollow with the videos, dropping the humor like a hammer on your tippy toes, bringing entertainment on a daily arrangement to take our insanity and turn it into entertainment. Yes, I said entertainment twice, to reiterate that it is nice to look into your faces on a mostly daily basis when you let us in your homes to make the whole world a stage. Goodbye.